Remote viewing data says there were ancient civilizations on Mars, and amazingly, that would corroborate extremely old art and underground civilizations found right here on Earth. How have cyclical events throughout the solar system's history affected the rise and fall of cultures? Was interplanetary travel once common? We'll talk about the H blocks at Pumapunku, Cydonia on Mars, the pyramids, and more in this episode. So join remote viewer John Vivanco and me, investigative researcher Rob Counts, for a show that's out of this world.
Are you listening to the Metaphysical Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or anywhere else? Leave us that 5-star rating and review. It really, really helps us reach more people.
John, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
Good. All right, you guys. In this episode, we're actually going to get into a lot of really interesting stuff. Last episode, we were talking about stuff they found in La Venta, the Olmecs, the Maya, the seed bags, and the Anunnaki and Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha, among other things. We got into a pretty philosophical conversation about archaeology, journalism, academics, and how it's really hard to find the truth right now, which are always healthy conversations to have. But we're actually going to get we're going to start drilling down a little bit more into some of the findings down in South America and what they mean. And I think it's going to be pretty interesting, especially when we get onto the subject of these colossal H stones. I don't know what to call them. What are they? H stones?
Yeah, they're just
Blocks.
calling them H
Blocks.
stones. Yeah, H blocks, whatever.
Yeah, and so we've got these H blocks, which do you know what country these are in, John?
Yeah, they would be. They're somewhat near Lake Titicaca, uh,
Bolivia?
Bolivia.
You say
Yeah,
Bolivia. Okay.
they're like on the other side of the lake or something from Peru.
Right. Okay. So these H stones are in Bolivia, and like, to me, if you were to show me these straight up, I would think these were poured cement. I mean, that's just me.
Right.
Just I have a father who did some construction type stuff. Not exactly in construction. He was a plumbing inspector, but I had to see a lot of this stuff growing up, and my uncle is a carpenter as well. Um, these things definitely look uh, like poured cement to me, not chiseled, because it's too exact. Like the way that yeah. And there were other openings too, right? It wasn't just these types of blocks. There were other blocks where there were bigger openings that I think they had found
Yeah.
around this structure in Pumapunku,
Right.
which all have the same style, you know. And now, John, you were telling me some interesting things about these blocks, right?
Those blocks, some an archeo. I'm not sure who it is, but some archaeologists believe, or specifically one believes, that basically, like what you are saying, they look like formed cement. And the reason why this guy's come to the opinion on that this is a type of cement is because in the interior there's organic matter, and organic matter isn't in the interior of rocks, right? So
Like
somehow
basalt or granite. Like, you don't
right.
have organic matter in there. You have crystals in there, but not necessarily organic matter, right?
No, you don't have and that organic matter, in those is basically the idea thought that organic matter mixed with some sort of mixture they had as they're creating these blocks, which makes a lot of sense. Now I don't know who are they attributing this to? Toltecs, probably. I mean, they attributed everything to the Toltecs,
Think the
um,
Toltecs.
right? But then they claim that the Toltecs had, primitive tools, very primitive, like um, rocks and hammers kind of situation, copper hammers or something. I don't know. brass ham, not brass, but yeah. So yeah, that those couldn't have been made with that. You know, it's a lot like the pyramids where of Egypt, where they say that they built those with what stone tools.
Well,
Uh,
and the colossal Olmec heads, which are
right,
closer in proximity to the H blocks.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you've got other structures around there too. So you've got those H blocks, that area. You've got this gate, the gate of the gods, the Sun Gate. Gates. I can't remember exactly what they call it, but that's right
Yeah.
there as well. And then you have a huge complex there at Pumapunku. But then the huge complex where you've got all like a courtyard and one of those gates at the top, et cetera, is a really fascinating area. Really, really fascinating area.
Okay, so what do you think? Okay, why organic matter in the concrete? Is this have something to do with? I mean, I've heard different theories revolved around stones that especially these H blocks were um I don't know what to call it. They used some type of resonance to levitate the rocks, place them all in. It was like a very short period of time, like one night or something.
Yeah,
Um, does this have anything to do with the organic matter inside? Why would organic matter be inside
right.
of these blocks? Do you have any idea?
Not from a like a technical standpoint, not necessarily from a technical standpoint. I mean, we had remote viewed um, generally like that area, and especially the big complex that's sitting over there. We had
Mm,
remote viewed that stuff, and we did get that that there were some aspects of high technology used in it, but it was a lot more like a relationship to beings like Quetzalcoatl, Viracocha, and others, not just that one deity, but others with them that were helping direct culture at that point. And so they had the people that they brought there or seated there working on it in like supervision with them in order to
mm.
create this stuff, right? So perhaps like the concrete type form that they were pouring into molds, perhaps they were messy with it because it was like mostly people doing it under the guidance and direction of these others to set up
Oh.
culture, right? So perhaps it was that. I can't say for sure, I don't know, but perhaps it was that. But we do get some of these other aspects that it was created with higher technology, um, but only with those other beings working with that higher technology and not the people that they brought.
Now, okay, so we've got the structures are huge. They're fantastic, and we've seen that this culture um, is like it's at least the one from Mesoamerica. These are pretty far apart. Where we're talking about
Yeah.
Pumapunku is pretty far from Central America, where the Mesoamerican civilization basically flourished for a while. Now, when you and I were on a telephone call a few weeks ago and we started kind of talking about this, I was telling you everything I was finding in Mesoamerica, and you told me something pretty fantastic about this area, specifically the Peruvian area, and um, it kind of funneled down into a larger conversation about Mars. So, what exactly? Why don't you just kind of recount or retell what you were telling me, and then we can
Yeah.
get into a larger conversation about
Yeah, this it's okay. So a long time ago, I was running projects on the Cydonia region of Mars. Like we're
it.
talking like like around the year 2000, right?
What kind of
Because
projects? What kind of projects? Like remote viewing?
yeah, remote viewing projects. Because okay, so the way I started out in remote viewing, it was very much like I didn't think about this kind of stuff because I was always working. It was always just work. It was like uh, like regular real world type projects, whether that was for law enforcement, FBI, whether that was for a business. It was always like that kind of stuff. And we did not venture too much into any other realm, not weird stuff, except maybe very, very rarely. There was this, what happened? I was very much interested in just doing a quick tasking on the face on Mars,
Yeah.
just to see, like, I wanted to see um, how that formed. Because at that point in time, I was doing a lot of, we were like off to the side, like we do treasure hunting projects, right? Because we're in Southern California, and like that desert out there is like the Spanish used to bring riches up from Mexico, and so there's all these treasure stories out there. So we used to
And
do treasure.
The Goonies are from the West Coast. I mean,
They're
so
from, yeah, the
makes sense.
Goonies are there. They're like somewhere near there, and the Goonies were like one of my favorite
Yeah.
movies when I was a kid. So I was like, I knew what remote viewing data looked like, and when it came to remote viewers describing how, like, natural elements formed, right? Because we're very adept at that. We're very adept at mineralogy. We're very adept at describing how landforms were created, right? And so it's a very easy thing at that point to be able to understand if something is natural or artificial just by remote viewing. Very,
Mm,
very, very, it's like one of the simplest things at base.
mm.
Because one of the first things a remote viewer does is they do a quick thing that we call an ideogram. It's like a little scribble. And then they identify that ideogram by probing on
Yeah.
it with their pen. And the categories of definition that they would describe it as would be natural landform, easy to tell, easy to feel, a subject, like a being, water, easy, super easy stuff, a surface, energy, or an artificial structure, right? And so
Mhm.
we train ourselves in this constantly, and they're always very accurate when you're a good remote viewer. So I tap, and it's really easy. Like, okay, like you get a landform that somebody says is like an eroded sphinx, right? Somewhere. Oh, that's definitely, pareidolia aside, somebody thinks there's an eroded sphinx there from ancient, like way beyond ancient times, that nobody believes them. Easy enough to remote view that and go describe how this formed, and really
Which,
based
by the
off.
way, there is a Guatemalan Sphinx that we might wanna talk about at some point
Yeah,
because allegedly, like, it could be the shape of what seems like a sphinx, but a lot of people think it was an actual sphinx because it has the same
right, right,
look and feel of the sphinx in Egypt.
right, right, right. So in one of those sessions, like right off the bat, the viewer will either get they'll do a quick ideogram, they'll get a natural landform, and they'll begin to describe a natural landform, or they'll get an artificial structure and they'll begin to describe that. In a natural landform, it usually has to do with lava flow, it has to do with wind, erosion, water. They describe these types of things occurring, right? So it's really easy. If it's a artificial, they have subjects that are constructing something. They have uh, stuff to do with buildings, like building something. There's more to it, right? And then they go down that path. So when I first tasked on Cydonia region, specifically the face on Mars, I got the data back because I was going to run the project on it. And I wanted to map out the whole Cydonia region based off of like the satellite photos, because there's other things there too, pyramids and whatnot that look like that. And so I get the data back. Now, I didn't believe one way or another what direction it would go. I was very used to seeing stuff that people claimed was something just be wind and erosion for the most
Yeah, it
part,
comes
right?
back as a natural formation,
Right.
just seems to look like
100%.
something.
Right,
Right.
right. A lot of people make claims, but those claims don't stand up when we remote view it. So when we viewed that, like, first data I get back, I go to the first page of one of the viewers and it's like artificial structure ideogram. Immediately, artificial structure. Then they start to talk about the artificial structure, and the artificial structure is massive. They're talking about red sand. They're
Mm.
talking about how sand has taken over parts of the structure and gotten inside because the walls have collapsed. They're talking about these massive columns, like if you remember Lord of the Rings, for instance, when they
Oh,
were,
in Moria, like
yeah,
the
when they're like
dwarven
underground,
king.
right?
Right.
And it's like that huge hallway underground with all those columns. That's what it looks like inside the face on Mars, because it's partially collapsed, and sand dunes have gotten inside. And then these massive columns on the yeah, like that picture that Lindsay's showing. And these massive columns, they're not Corinthian, but they're columns that have low relief on them in sort of a
Mm.
square build, and
Hmm.
they have images carved of Quetzalcoatl.
No way.
Yes, of Quetzalcoatl. So the viewers were all describing that. They were talking about in the data how, like, if they're blind, they don't know what they're viewing. And they're coming to these conclusions that they are remote viewing some type of Mesoamerican pyramidal type structure that is very old and has collapsed. And they're perceiving this winged serpent being carved into the columns there, same as what we find here in the Americas, or in,
Like
you
this,
know,
the guy with the seed bag and the helmet.
yeah, same thing, right? Right, same thing. Okay, so not just that, there's pottery shards littered under the ground or under the sand. These structures are very, very much like the pyramids that you find in Mesoamerica. Very much like that. The same style, the same iconography, across the board, the same iconography. And then when we, okay, so when I first saw that, I was like, holy moly, right? Like, we're so good at being able to describe whether something is natural or artificial, and every single remote viewer comes back as artificial structures, and the same exact stuff that they're relating to some Mesoamerican type culture, right? Across, except they're on Mars because they're describing like red sand everywhere and stuff, right? So so that was my first foray. This is like late 90s, like to 2000, in that time frame, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible, this is amazing, it's like this archaeologist's wet dream over there,
Yeah, right.
you know. And
Yeah.
so I embarked on, at that point, like, I got to map this whole area out. I got to find out what that structure was for. I got to find out what these other structures were for. I got to find out who these people were. I got to find out what it used to look like there, right? Like, how did they live? What was the terrain like? So I went into this massive project over the years. I mean, work gets in the way because work is like remote viewing to make money, right? So it gets pushed aside. And so I would always come back to it, and continually build it. And it's really developed into this massive remote viewing narrative of what happened there and who these people were and what happened to these people, right? Now there is that CIA document that where they remote viewed Mars, and they actually went way back in time. And then when you go way, way back in time on planets, um, it can get different because there's always coming and going by other beings from planets, right? At the point in time when these beings had left the planet, there were major things going on. But up until that time, they had a stable culture. They had a connection with other beings from other locations. It was an open thing. It was like, well, these beings from this other system are coming, and we're going to trade this and that with them, right? It was a thing. Like, that's how normally things are out there.
It's, yeah,
And
trade.
right. So when I got into the descriptions of the beings, let's focus on that. The beings that live there, they were small statured, shorter. Uh, they looked like Central American Indians, um, uh, Indians from Mexico, the native peoples from what we consider native peoples from Mexico, native peoples from Central America, not necessarily South America. There is some connection there, but South America is a totally different thing. Not a lot of people settled down there. Um, but mostly it was like Central is where they settled, Central and Mexico. And these people, the descriptions of them were exactly like native Peruvians, just any native Mayan, Mesoamerican in general. The same physical construct, the same attitudes, the same iconography. Everything about them was exactly the same. And then we've got this iconography of Quetzalcoatl on Mars. We've got the structures the same on Mars. So what happened, like when we started to go into like what happened to these people, well, they used to live on this planet that was very rich. There were a lot of plants. It was green and blue. It had big water. In fact, Cydonia was surrounded, not surrounded, but like on a huge side of it there was water, and it was this very shallow sea that went for, it was their ocean, it was part of their ocean. And this shallow sea, you could walk into it for quite a while because it was so shallow. It was very salty.
Mm.
And on the shore were huge plants, like big ferns, big plants with big leaves, like stuff that we would consider prehistoric. And the whole
Mm.
area was almost jungle like. And these people who lived in that area, um, they pretty much were just like living, not really interested in what was going on in the universe around them, right? What we saw with Mars is that Mars went through a great cataclysm. And this cataclysm was because there were others in the solar system who were at war with each other. It seemed to be related to um, what we have between Mars and Jupiter. Like there used to be other things there. Now we've got an asteroid belt there, right?
Right.
It seemed to be related to that. And it seemed to be something like, well, there was a moon of Jupiter, and there was potentially a planet where that asteroid belt is. There was a culture that lived on the planet and the moon of Jupiter. And this culture was kind of in a civil war. Like it seemed to be that was a elite group that considered themselves royal that lived on one of the moons of Jupiter, and they were at war with their subjects who were living on a planet where the asteroid belt is. And through this war, civil war that they had, that planet or the moon and planet or whatever got destroyed, broken up. Which, like, we've seen this when we look at other asteroid belts. It's like the craziest stuff. It's like, gee, let's remote view that asteroid belt around Vega or Epsilon Eridani or any other asteroid belt. And every single time we remote view these, we get a planet that was obliterated, literally obliterated. Which, you wonder, it's like, why am I getting this data all the time on this? Is just like remote viewers are just, whacked out, or just like
You're
just,
right.
and then you go, okay, well, let's remote view the Kuiper belt. That's a big belt of rock and ice at the end of our solar system. And
That's
we
like
remote,
beyond, is that beyond Pluto, that area?
yes, beyond Uranus, beyond Pluto. Sorry,
Oh,
that always
yeah.
makes you laugh.
Most things are beyond my anus.
Right. This is so stupid. The
Oh,
Kuiper
it's
belt.
beyond, oh, it's near between Neptune and Pluto, it
Yeah,
says here.
right.
Interesting.
So we looked at that. That came back as all natural. So I'm like, okay, good. Finally, we get something natural. And so I can trust data more so, remote viewing data more so, that these other asteroid belts did not form naturally, right? When it comes to our asteroid belt, like you could, if you had a spaceship and you flew through our asteroid belt, you may not even see a rock. You might see one rock, but you wouldn't see any others because it's such little matter there, and so spread out that you would
So spread
hardly
out.
see anything. In fact, the amount of matter there is probably only about one third of the size of our moon if you were able to put it all together. And
Mm.
what we saw as part of the reason why is that a lot of this matter got sucked into Jupiter, right?
Mm. Oh.
Jupiter's gravity field pulled it in,
Mhm.
right? So that's why there's not a lot of matter there for a planet-sized object. So during this period of time, it extended out into other parts of the universe, or sorry, the solar system, and one of those was Mars. There were like some of these sort of, I guess, running battles that would occur in that area, in that region. And one of the problems it appeared to be in remote viewing data was that things were knocked around quite a bit because they have technology or had technology that literally is planet scale technology that can move planets, that can destroy planets. And when you get to like the concept of using planets as spaceship, as a spaceship, it's a thing because like it's actually easier to be able to be on a planet size or asteroid size object and move that thing around than it is to build something and put it out there. And so this is a thing. This is actually a thing that even scientists now are talking about. Like, yes, this is what we've got to do. We've got to like
This is why
commandeer this. Yeah.
Right. This is why I always think it's hilarious when, you turn TV on and they're talking about like, well, I think there's a Dyson sphere around that sun
Right.
in a
Right.
distant galaxy. And it's like, if they had actual technology to create a Dyson sphere, pretty sure they could do a lot more than that, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah. We actually looked at that Dyson sphere, and no, it wasn't. It's not anything artificial. It was not anything artificial.
Yeah, so for those
Yeah,
of you at home that don't know what a Dyson sphere is, it's basically a theoretical piece of technology that a advanced civilization might put around the sun to extract energy from the sun, and that's how you would be able to tell that it is an advanced civilization because only, I mean, again, it's like this is as creative as our scientists can get in how to create energy with the current technology that we have.
right,
You just have to keep it there, kind of. It's like
right.
it's a theory, it doesn't.
Yeah,
And them being able to detect a Dyson sphere is kind of nonsense. I mean, you can't
right.
see anything. So again, you're basing what you think you're seeing off of a theory that may or may not exist at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and we looked at that and it was something natural. It was just something natural that was almost like an optical illusion as well. So asteroids, I mean, when you get into the scale of, there's a scale that a physicist or astronomical or a astronomer, he was like a
An astronomer,
physicist and astronomer. The
an astrophysicist.
out there, put those two together, and that's what you get. What the heck, man? What's wrong with my
an
brain?
an ancient alien. What do they call those? Astronaut theorist.
Right, right, right.
Is that what they're called? Astronaut theorists? Ancient astronaut theorists.
Ancient
That's what they call
astronaut
them.
theorists. Right,
Ancient astronaut theorists
yeah,
say yes.
right. So this astrophysicist, the what is it? The Kardiev scale. I can't remember exactly what it is. He developed a scale of civilizations, class one, two, three, four, five. Right.
Hmm.
We are like sub class one as far as where we are, but I think it's just like a class one type civilization would be, or class one or class two would be using asteroids and planetary type bodies as vehicles as opposed to constructing spaceships, right? So it's a thing. The Kardashev scale. That's what it is. So basically, they were in that. They would be like a class one or class two civilization that were fighting with each other, and they can manipulate planetary size objects, and that's what they were doing. And so there was this sort of like thing that we saw as something passed by Mars. They were like knocking stuff out of orbit and whatever. There are actually also these like sort of legends that Venus wasn't where it currently is, that it was potentially like closer to Jupiter at a certain point. So things were kind of knocked out of orbit, shaken up. We can't figure everything out with remote viewing, and who even knows if we're figuring anything out?
Right,
But it
right.
is presenting sort of an interesting narrative. Um, that something passed by Mars and there was sort of an electrical discharge. And this goes into the whole thunderbolt of the gods thing, right? Where there's a theory that planetary bodies and suns have are more electrical bodies and can interact with each other, and asteroids, they're electrical bodies. And what we had seen was that giant crater Valles Marineris
Yes.
was torn out at that time by some types of electrical discharge from something else, from some other object that was seemed to be more planetary in nature. And also on top of that, the atmosphere was completely destroyed. So at that point in time, our remote viewing data starts talking about how beings were taken off that planet. Not everybody, but specific ones were taken off that planet and brought to Earth, right? And that's when we start to get into the beings that are like Quetzalcoatl. That's when we start to get into this idea of those beings were taken here to Mesoamerica, right? And that's why we have that relationship between Quetzalcoatl, all the same sort of like structural designs in our remote viewing data showing up there as they do in Central South America, Mesoamerica in general. And the being of Quetzalcoatl was actually a real being that carrying the seeds of civilization in the bag is responsible for helping in this manner, right, in reestablishing. And so really that's kind of like the general narrative around what we've seen as it relates to Mars and like Peruvians, for instance,
So
or
this is what you're
Mayans.
talking about, right, John? This
Yeah,
picture that
yeah,
we're showing right now is there's this like huge gash in Mars. This is
right,
Mars, right?
yeah,
Where you're saying earlier to me at least that this thing is like way way bigger than the Grand Canyon, right?
way bigger. Yeah, way, way
And
bigger.
and so this gash was created from the sort of warring that John described, and then a lot of people had to be taken off planet and they were brought to Mars. I mean, sorry, from Mars they were brought to Earth, it sounds
Yeah,
like. Is that right?
yeah, 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 yeah. That's what we perceive. That's what we've gotten in remote viewing data. Yeah, yeah. And so that
Wow.
culture that was there is a direct has a direct relationship to those cultures that we have here currently, and the bloodline of Mars exists within those people now here on
Wow,
Earth.
look at that. Look at that. That's just
Yeah.
like
Do
something
you think
scraped.
that? Do you think water did that? No.
Yeah, no, that is a gigantic, massive scrape of some sort.
Right.
Like something massive
Right.
tore that out of the planet.
Yeah. 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 Something tore that out of the planet. Just cut it. Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. I mean, that's when we
Wow.
view it, we get this electrical discharge from something else.
So, and it was an electrical discharge that created that. So it wasn't actually
What it
like a
appears to be.
object scraping it. It was like some type of.
There could have been that as well, but there was like this like electrical interaction between the two. Yeah. Very, very strange stuff. Very interesting, strange stuff that goes into like fringe theories, highly, highly fringe theories on how the universe exists. And I don't think the universe and how planetary, sun, whatever bodies, how our current science explains them to be, I think it's different than that. I think it's way more than that. So in our data starts to go into that a bit, and I don't think everything is exactly as um, people have theorized. When you get to the whole thunderbolt of the gods
Yeah.
idea, everything's an electrical body. I think there's some of that in it, and some of what current scientists theorize. I think it's more of a big mix than one thing or the other.
Yeah. And I mean, electrical discharge, I mean, we're talking about if that was an electrical discharge or some type of laser that created that, we're talking about Death Star technology, essentially.
Right. Well, yeah, but look at this. Okay, so when you get into the idea of okay, there's the whole thing. We've talked about this before, like the Etruscan pyramids, right? The
Yeah. Yeah.
underground Etruscan pyramids. Like when we remote viewed that, for instance, we remote viewed what caused the Younger Dryas, for instance, we literally get, and when the mammoths, like, why are there mammoths with food in their mouth? Like, and they
Mm,
were flash frozen in an instant.
yes.
They were flash frozen, right? So when we look at all these separate things as to, why those were built, or why the mammoths have were flash frozen, we get the collapsing of the atmosphere, and we get an electrical discharge that goes through the planet, a massive electrical discharge that goes through the whole planet, because something else is going on in our solar system that causes the planet to react that way. And in
Mm.
that electrical discharge, it destroys land, it destroys Earth, it kills everything. And we're talking about an electrical discharge that is as big as Valles Marineris, right? So we've seen that here on Earth as well, right? So yeah, and this is a phenomena that's created by another phenomena, right? Whether that
So you're
is something from the sun or a
right.
planetary body coming too close, there's something about electricity and planets that we just don't know enough about.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, gosh, man, I don't know. This was reminding me of the Shroud of Turin episode that we did because of the way that the earthquake, like when there's earthquakes, when there's volcanic activity, you're seeing the Earth and the ionosphere communicating.
Right.
And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there was evidence of a huge electrical disturbance, maybe not a disturbance, in the cave that Jesus was in after he had come down from the cross, was put in the cave, and the Shroud of Turin seems to be evidence of all of that. And if you
Right.
haven't seen this episode, you totally should. Another thing is, if you're interested, so John was just talking about this story, all revolved around what happened more recently, I guess you would say, on the planet Mars, and these people coming over to Earth, right? I mean, what would you say this was like in the last 15,000 to 30,000 years ago, something like that,
No, it's way
or
beyond
greater?
that. Way
So
beyond
you're
that.
how long ago do you think that this
I
was?
think they were brought here before 12,000 years, way before that. I
So,
think they were
like,
brought here
if you
way
were
before.
to estimate, are we
It
talking
could have
like
been like
hundreds of
20.
thousands?
It could have been over 25,000 years ago, in that
Really?
sort of realm. Yeah. I see, time frames are really hard. Time frames are weird because, like, when
I
you
know.
task on time frames in remote viewing, you're going off of a construct that can be faulty from the get-go. Like it could be like nonsense from the get-go. These time frames, I don't know about.
I mean,
I just
and
don't
the
know.
fact that none of our archaeologists know exactly what happened or what was going on the Earth, like 30,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, that creates a problem too.
Right.
We just did an episode on the Cydonia area of Mars where, John, you mentioned this earlier, where some remote viewers were tasked on viewing the planet Mars 1 million years ago, approximately, right?
Right. Right.
And we went through in our episode the details of this declassified CIA
Right.
document,
Right. Right.
or this released CIA document. And it's fascinating because, John, you're talking about a period that was maybe 30,000 or greater years ago.
I
It
don't even
could
know
be,
time frames on it. Yeah.
and who knows? Maybe it was a million years ago.
Right.
Who knows, right? But this CIA document talks about a um, a period that was a million years ago, and what exactly happened to the race that was living on Mars in the Cydonia area. Actually, I went and looked at the longitude and latitude that they were asking the remote viewer to view. And I tracked it back to the Cydonia area. If you use the European longitude latitude model of Mars, it was the Cydonia area. And this was, we're talking about in the 70s here, right? Not only that, even creepier than that was that in this remote viewing document, like, think about it. The data given to the remote viewer from the outset actually shows us that they knew a lot more going into this remote viewing session than they should have. Like, you don't just randomly ask a remote viewer to go back a million like, approximately a million years, and then you
Right.
direct him to hone in on a period of time,
Right.
right in that million-year area, and then you start moving them around to areas of Cydonia to try to find out exactly what was going on, how this race of beings died, and then even creepier than that, or cooler than that, I guess, whichever you wanna look at it, is the remote viewer ended up having interactions with the alien or alien race that was there, asking them what was going on.
Yeah.
And the being was responding to them. And he even said in the remote viewing document that this being viewed him as some type of like hallucination, doesn't know who I am or what I am, views me more like a hallucination. And he basically said that that they were being very philosophical about it, that there was really nothing that they could do, that they had sent out a probe to try to find, an alternative planet for them to move their civilization to,
Yeah.
but they just had to wait, basically. Now, the fact that communication was encouraged with these beings, and then they were asking the beings if there was anything that they could do to help them is very interesting as well, because now we're not talking about just remote viewing. We're talking about astral communication through time using remote viewing in the present, which is, if you think about it, a concept that people just like blow their mind. Actually, if you start talking about that, that's totally mind blowing. And that's what this document was basically saying.
Yeah.
This is what they were dabbling in,
Right.
right? I kind of want to know. Let's say, so now we know that from this document. I'm just going to go into a few more of the details, right? And definitely please watch this episode if you haven't watched this episode yet, because it will give you, it runs through the document and goes through and strings things together about Mars, specifically Mars 1 million years ago, and specifically the Cydonia area of Mars. So if you're interested in that, definitely go check it out. But some of the details um in this document is that, this race of beings had created, a massive civilization that was dying out. They were really tall, right? And thin. They looked thin because they were so tall, that there were lots of structures. They described almost like superhighways or something like that. That these beings were or had used, and that they had done what human beings we see here do when there is some type of cataclysm that happens on the surface of the planet. They were digging basically these types of rabbit warren things where they were sleeping and hibernating for long periods of time to try to avoid the catastrophes that were, or the storms. They kept calling them storms that were coming, right? And now this is, well, according to this remote viewing document, this is a million years ago. So we're talking now about a planet that has a massive history that goes way beyond even this civilization onto new civilizations of different
Yeah.
time periods, based off of what John is telling us that he and his remote viewers
Well,
found about the
okay.
Cydonia area.
Okay. So I kind of like, based off of remote viewing data, I kind of subscribe to this idea of the yugas and the resets of civilization every 12,000, every 24,000 years through cataclysm, because the geologic record is there on this type of idea, which lines up with, and there are 30 cultures across this planet, old cultures, who talk about the same 12,000 year time frame
Yeah,
over and over again. And when we remote view like what this is, it always goes back to, there's something with the sun, there's something that affects the sun, and this in turn affects our whole solar system. So see, Mars would go through the same thing and have
have to, I imagine. Yeah,
these cataclysms that are happening. If it would, every 12,000, every 24,000 years, it would go through the same thing over and over again. So when you talk about like the CIA sending someone back a million years ago or whatever, a million BC, how many cataclysms have happened from that period of time up to now? How many cultures have developed just like ours has developed in that period of time and then wiped out over and over again? How many times did the little guys with the baggies had to go reseed everything? How many times, right?
yeah,
It just happens over and over again, right?
yeah,
From tall beings who developed to short red beings who developed. I mean, it's endless. It's endless.
Yeah, I mean, it must be. And you know what's really interesting, not to get too weird or to geek out too much about
Don't
math,
get
but
too weird, man.
what
What are
one of
you
my
talking
theories,
about, man?
one of my theories, okay, after because we know the Cydonia area of Mars has pyramids or some type of pyramids. Some people are calling them five-sided pyramids. Some people think they're just classic pyramids. Whatever. You and I have talked about this many times before on this show. All uh, advanced civilizations end up building pyramids for whatever reason. All right, now the pyramids that we have here in Giza, the biggest and the baddest pyramids, the Pyramid of Khufu, which they call it the Pyramid of Khufu. This is on Mars, by the way, in the Cydonia area. They think that this is a five-sided pyramid structure, which I don't know. I'm not really sold on. This looks more mountainous to me, but whatever. That's what some people are thinking. Now, um, but the pyramid at Giza, that pyramid is built to be at scale with the Earth. If you were to cut the Earth in half and then build a pyramid from the half of the Earth to the top of the Earth, and then shrink it down proportionately, you'd have the exact proportion of the pyramid, which, by the way, is near impossible to do if you're not an extremely advanced civilization building with massive blocks like that. Human beings now I'm even doubtful now we could do that. It would be such a massive undertaking, so much money, so much work. Okay, now that pyramid, okay, the circumference of the earth is something about, and maybe Lindsay can help us out on this, is something about 24,000, has some number that's around 24,000, um, like not, yeah, 24,901 miles. Now, what's so interesting about this number to me is if you were to cut this number in half, which is the circumference of the Earth, you'd have about 12,450.5, which is what I was saying. So that number right there, you take that number and now you have the numbers for the cataclysms that happen every. I have a feeling that the math of the planet itself has something to do with the cataclysms that are happening,
Yeah, yeah,
and that
yeah,
the
totally.
pyramids were trying to tell us that. Like, there's something going on with the pyramids where they built those at the scale that they
Right,
did
right,
to
right.
point out the circumference of the Earth and to explain to us all of the math revolved around that so that we would know when the cataclysms were coming. And because all of these are, you have to understand too that these measurements are based off of things that go way beyond they go way beyond what normal, I don't want to say normal mathematicians are doing, but what normal people are doing with math on a daily
Right,
basis. Let's put it
right,
that way.
right,
So we're
right.
talking about the golden ratio. We're talking about phi and pi and numbers that like they found to never end, and they're doing math around these, and they're comparing those with cosmic things and then bringing them down into structures that they put on the planet to warn us of stuff,
Right,
you
right.
know?
I
And
know, I
and it
know, I know, I
And so,
know.
like, when I found out that these cataclysms were every 12,000 years or something like that, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, when I was researching the pyramid, I was just like, and then to find out that the math around the pyramid lines up exactly with the speed of light,
Numerically, yep. Oh, with the
numerically
speed
with
of
the speed of
light.
light. It's
Oh gosh,
literally
that's
it's
interesting.
yeah, it's like this thing, whatever this is, has something very much to do with it's like a representation of the physical world in a way that's so far beyond what human beings can almost even accept. The more you research this thing, the deeper and crazier it gets, and the more you start enlightening to weird things about like this dimension and science and all of that stuff. And this is why I think the Masons protect it so much.
Right,
it's because it's because those secrets, if you start researching the pyramid, you'll find the ends to the answers of the universe that you're actually looking for as a Mason or whoever it is.
right.
And you can find too many things out. Now this is the episode right here. It's the pyramids are a map to a technological cosmic code. Highly recommend watching that because my mind was way too blown after doing that episode. I was
Yeah,
like, I
yeah,
tried to fit in like 3 hours of information into 20 minutes. My head
right.
hurt after. Um, but yeah, so it's like, could that be, like, could it be that the math around these things, even on Mars, like, I wonder, Is it just every 24,000 years, or do we have these things, these cataclysms are actually related to the planets themselves and the measurements on those particular planets that the beings there that are advanced had to have known about, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that this, I literally think that this has to do with different particles coming from a different part of the universe, and in these sort of like intense and less intense waves. And I think that because, see, one of the things that people have been noticing lately, astrophysicists, is that in a line going towards the center of our galaxy, suns are starting to go into these sort of micronova bursts, and
Mm,
it's getting closer and closer and closer. And so one of the theories is that this is a particle wave that comes every 12,000 years,
yeah.
that that causes suns to react this way, as well as electrical fields of planets, magnetic fields of planets, because we are now seeing weird perturbations, um, and storms occurring throughout other planets in our solar system that have never been there before. So things are changing on an electromagnetic level and causing planets to react in certain ways. So that's one of the theories or ideas about it. Of course, it's very, very fringe, but a lot of our data points in that direction. It points
Mm,
in that direction as it's something to do with our sun begins to have a reaction to these particles. The electromagnetic field of the sun shifts, it changes, it flips. The sun kind of like goes into darkness, like it gets like a black sheath, a black field around it, because something's changing within it. This is the story, the idea behind it, not remote viewing data. And then it bursts, and all that matter is shot out across the solar
or
system.
electromagnetic matter or whatever,
Electromagnetic matter, right, right, right.
solar
So,
matter.
so our data seems to follow like somewhat along that line, and all of the things that does to a planet, which would affect
For sure.
every planet.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think we're going to wrap up this episode right now. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please leave us a comment below and let us know what you thought, or if you have any additional comments, to support kind of what we're saying, or let's keep the conversation going there. We appreciate you guys very much. Thanks for watching. And by the way, if you'd like to support our work, you can get a bag of delicious metaphysical coffee every month sent to your home if you're in the United States. Not only that, but that bag of coffee comes from the Guatemala area, which is the area that we're talking about right now. That's right. Yeah. So you can have some delicious coffee that the Maya have signed off on, or something like that. Anyway, we appreciate you guys very much, and we'll see you next time. In the next episode, we're going to be getting more into the Maya, the Toltecs, art, culture. The Olmecs are just very, very interesting. The colossal heads, we got to get into that, and I can give you my theories there, John, on what I think is going on. So, hope you guys thought this episode was as out of this world as we did. We'll see you next time.